Welcome, everybody, to Who's Your Band? I am Jeffrey Paul. I am joined by comic Sean Morton. How are you, Sean?
Fantastic, Jeffrey. I just saw the list of upcoming concerts from PNC, and there was one show that I decided that there is no chance in hell that I'm ever going to go to, but I guarantee that you're going to be at. It was Styx with the singer from REO Speedwagon and Don Felder.
Yeah, I've seen all those acts.
Well, you can wave when you drive past the Parkway. Wave past 125. My ass will not be at that concert.
Not only have I gone to those shows, okay, I have also had backstage passes. I've had VIP in the front row for those shows. My wife loves Styx, and they put on a great show every time I've seen them. So
you made fun of me for waiting online to meet Mariah Carey, who is a gorgeous woman, but it's okay for you to spend $800 to meet the guys from Styx backstage. That's what you're telling me.
See, I'm going to give you a little tip.
I'm the asshole.
I'm going to give you a tip here before we bring on a guest, okay? You make your wife happy, you're going to have no problems. Mm-hmm. With that corny fucking sentiment. All right. Our next guest, all right. He is a comedian. He was a television personality. He's a radio personality, and if I'm not mistaken, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he has worked or currently works in law enforcement. The one and only Mr. John Mulrooney. How are you, John?
Why are you guys up to something no good?
Listen, I'm former law enforcement.
No, not at all.
Oh, where'd you work?
I used to work in Staten Island, and what I did was if you were in violation of your probation, I worked field services. I went out and arrested you.
Oh, dude. Okay. Yeah. We used to work with them all the time. Yeah.
I did a lot of evading.
Huh? I would say there's nothing more dangerous than a guy
with your wife.
There's nothing more dangerous than a guy who knows he's going back to jail.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
Yeah. Good point. Yes. But I want to talk about John for a second, okay? John, you grew up in Brooklyn. What part of Brooklyn did you grow up in?
Grew up in Flatbush, went to Brooklyn Tech. I went to Brooklyn College. So a lot of Brooklyn background stuff. Yep.
Yeah, because you're in Brooklyn, and this is, I guess, this had to be like, I guess, the 70s, early 80s. Were you part of that whole Pip scene at all?
Oh, dude, that was my club. That was the place. That was where I started out. That, Seth Schultz, the owner of that place, used to say, Pips, where the mobsters meet the lobsters. And he wasn't kidding. And that place, dude, I mean, we rubbed elbows with the guys that you see in the movies today. Richard Kuklinski, Roy DeMeo, Tommy Karate, who used to practice his karate right outside the club during the show. Paul Castellano came in one night, hung out for the show. Actually, I
thought you were going to say he went up and did some time.
Hey, all right, baby, work it out. He came in. Actually, the night he came in, there was no audience. He was next door having dinner at Randazzo's, and I don't know why he stumbled into Pips, but he came in loaded, and everyone was standing around the service bar talking about whether or not they were going to do a show. And he goes, I want to see a show. And he pulls off a 50 to this guy, a 50 to that guy, 100 to the bartender. And everybody was like, okay. And they scrambled to, put some kind of a show on. And just like in a movie scene, a couple of gangsters came in with their hands in their jackets going, Paulie, what are you doing in here? Like, what's going on? He's like, I went to the can. I wanted to see a show. And they were like, get out of here. So he came in, literally sat down for like 2 minutes, tipped a bunch of people to get a show started that he never saw. And then his boys hauled him on out. I mean, it was quite a place, Pips. It was no joke. If you could work there and make people laugh, you knew that you could go anywhere and do comedy.
That's a sad story. I feel bad he didn't see the show. I hope he was able to make the rent that month after wasting all that money.
Yeah.
Paul Castellano had no problem making the rent or anything. Who'd you come up with over there?
Oh, dude, name it. Dice. I remember.
Dude, was this before or during when Wheels Parisi used to host? I think it was the Michael.
Dude, when I first started going, it was 1978, 1979. And so Wheels Parisi probably wasn't even born yet. I mean, and Dice he was same age as me. I was 20, 21. And I saw Seinfeld coming in there working out on the weekends. Paul Reiser, the big dog on the porch back then was David Brenner. David Brenner was the guy. And he was the guest host of the Tonight Show at the time, but he would come in regularly and work out at Pips. In fact, he paid to have Pips remodeled. The year right before I started working there, he paid to have the whole place gutted and remodeled into the classic arched window place that was Pips right up until the day it closed. Before that, it was like a coffee shop that was for singers and, I guess you could say, comedians. And much to the chagrin of Bud Friedman, Bud used to say all the time that his club was the first comedy showcase club. I respect the hell out of Bud, and never going to speak ill of the dead. But Bud, you were wrong. Pips was there before the Improv because I was there. I was on stage doing the do, and then the Improv opened up like 6 months later in the late 70s.
So you go up at Pips. Now, is Dice known at this point, or is he kind of like a new guy like you?
No, Andy. I watched Andy Kaufman there. People didn't know who he was at the time.
What did you think when you saw him for the first time?
The first time I saw Andy Kaufman was at the Improv and in New York, and he pissed me off, and I'll tell you why. He did stuff that I thought was really fucking dangerous, and everyone thought, oh, he's a genius. He's this. He's that. He's not a genius when he's doing shit that can hurt people. He went up on stage one night and he starts reading from A Tale of Two Cities. And
yeah, that was a famous bit of his.
Right. And he was reading out of this book and he starts reading, and I didn't know where he was going with it. And he was getting a couple of chuckles, and there was probably about 20, 30 people in the room, but it was late at night. And after a minute or two, people started heckling and then getting a little more aggressive. And then finally, like within 4 or 5 minutes, they're screaming, do a joke, do something. And he flips to the back of the book and he pulls out a little starter pistol that he had cut out into a niche. And he starts shooting the starter pistol into the crowd. And people were diving over tables to get away from it. They thought it was a real gun. And then he ran out the door and ran up 44th Street. I could still remember hearing him laughing as he was running up 44th Street in Manhattan. And I thought, dude, and he wasn't famous. He became famous shortly thereafter. But I was like, what a fucking asshole. I never really liked what he did, to be quite honest with you. Never really dug it.
Wow. I knew about the Tale of Two Cities bit. Because I wound up having like a whiskey with Zamuda, Bob Zamuda, who was his partner. He would tell me some of the stuff. He told me about the famous improv story when he goes up and, remember the bit, The Heckler?
Yeah, that was Zamuda in the audience, and Pat Benatar's family was sitting in the back. So funny you should mention that, because that was 1982 or 83. It was the 10-year anniversary of Catch Rising Star, and he almost prompted some gangsters to get up and actually hurt him. That is exactly. And they had to be taught. They had to be walked back and talked up. Yeah, I just saw it. I was in the city when that was going on, but you couldn't get into Catch at the time. It was a closed show.
I'm glad you confirmed that, because that's exactly the story that I heard. That, in fact, there's a guy, he said, if you watch it, because that's still on YouTube, that there was a guy and he's coming up to the cop and he had to be intercepted. And he had a gun on him, okay? And they had to tell him, hey, look, this is all part of a bit. And they had to calm him down, and they think they comped him his drinks and his food for that night. But the guy was pretty irate because he thought he was ruining the show. And he didn't get him.
Yep.
Wow.
There was a couple of those where it went to a point where people almost got hurt. And to me, the humor goes out the window when the blood starts flowing.
Now, I met you a couple of times. We worked together up with Larry D. And I think you would tell me you had brothers, and you guys were like pretty competitive, right? Sports guys.
That was not my thing. My older brother was a great athlete. He was great athlete, great student. And that I really never touched. I never got into sports until I got older. Boxing and racquetball was my thing. And those were two sports my brother never played. He was, competitive? No, not when it came to stuff like not when it came to sports. I mean, we were brothers. We were competitive in that regard. We fought like brothers, but it never on a sports field. In fact, I never competed against my brother in anything. To tell you the truth.
I think the like the hardness. Did that give you like the chops, the confidence, the ability? I mean, to go into Pips, to be like a 20-year-old guy, to face that type of, like, I heard the crowds could be very, very rough. It could be hard if you weren't good. To have like kind of like the balls to go up and be able to do it, to get up on stage and then to come back. Where did you get that from? Because early on, I mean, Sean will tell you there are comics that they don't do well, man. They'll take months off, they'll quit.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I can only say that I can't say that I felt like I was hard about it or tough about it. I loved doing it past the point of reason. You know, after you get kicked in the nuts a couple of times, ego-wise, you would think it'd be smart to step down from there. But I loved making people laugh so much. I loved the rush of it that I didn't care about standing up there, and I was good at it. You know, that was the one thing about doing comedy when I first started doing it that propelled me all through my career. There was a guy who I used to study. His name was John Martini. He made his life's work studying what he called life's universal principles. And one of his principles, which I actually found very early on, was he said, when the whys get big enough, the hows take care of themselves. When you figure out why you're doing something, how you're going to do it becomes secondary. And that was me with comedy. When I got on stage, and it was at Pips for the very first time to do comedy, I was struck. It was like being struck with lightning. I will never forget it. And I suddenly knew why I was doing what I was doing. I just loved it, and nothing was going to stop me. Nothing was going to get my way. And in fact, that night, it was such a profound experience. I went home. My parents used to stay up very late at night. And I remember walking in the door late that night after I passed the audition. And I said, Mom, Dad, I found out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And they got real quiet and they leaned forward. And I said, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. And my father said, I'm going to bed. and that was the beginning of it. But yeah, I just knew nothing was going to stop me. Once I got bit with that bug, I was all in. There was no second guessing. And that was very early on. That was within weeks of getting on stage.
And what was your first taste of success? Like, where was the first break come from?
You know what the very first taste was? Getting paid $5 at Pips for going on. I'll never forget it. When I finally passed the audition and I was now a regular, I was walking out the door one night and Seth Schultz said to me, hey, hold on a second, Johnny. And I stopped, and they had this giant old school brass cash register with the big keys that had the big $1 flags. They came up $1.50. Mm-hmm. And he went, ba-ching, and he pulled out a $5 bill and he snapped it open. And he goes, all the regulars get cab fare. And he handed me $5. And I will never forget it. I wanted to take that $5 and frame it, but I needed it to get home. Yeah, that was the first time I just got paid for telling jokes. It could have been 500,000. I didn't care. I got paid for telling jokes, and that I was all in. And there was a couple others along the way. I remember the first time, selling out a place and taking the door and looking at bricks of, dirty club money and going, holy shit, that's mine. And walking out with it in a burlap bag and a gun in my pocket. That was pretty hip too, and I wasn't the only one. Everybody was doing it. I was working with, Drew Carey and Tim Allen and guys. We were all basically kind of on the same level. Richard Jenny was my roommate, and everybody was taking off in different phases. We were working constantly. That was the good news. The bad news was there was so much.
Where were you working? Were you working on the road, or were you working in New York?
In New York alone, the work in New York back in those days, we called the bridge and tunnel clubs. And it was stuff, Jersey Shore in the summer. The Hamptons was big. In fact, you dig this. Donald Trump's father offered me a job once. I was working out at the East End Comedy Club on Long Island. It was a seasonal club that was attached to the East Side Comedy Club, which was Richie's place. So there's a guy sitting up front, and he's dressed in a perfectly pressed blue linen jacket and white linen slacks. And, linen, when you look at it, wrinkles. This guy, he was perfectly pressed. Waxed handlebar mustache, bottle of Dom Perignon, and an ascot scarf on his neck. And I remember thinking, on a lot of people that would look pretentious, but it worked on him. And I didn't know who he was yet.
Sounds like Mrs. Howell.
Dude, he was Mr. Howell, but he was a complete gentleman. And again, keep in mind, I didn't know who he was, but I go up on stage. He was sitting by himself, and this guy was laughing at setups. I will never forget it. So I had a field day with this dude. And I get off the stage, and the club owner comes up to me and he said, "John, you that well-dressed gentleman sitting up front?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, that's Fred Trump. That's Donald Trump's father. He gave me his business card. He wants you to call him." And I'm going, holy shit. I'm thinking Trump was talking about building a casino in Atlantic City. I'm thinking casinos, private parties. His yacht was always docked in the East River. So I wait till Monday, right? I think I don't want to call too late. Don't want to call too early. 11 o'clock should be good. And I'm thinking, he's going to blow me off. I call, and I got his secretary, and I said, "Hi, John Mulrooney calling for Mr. Trump." And she goes, "Oh, Mr. Mulrooney, he's been expecting your call." And I'm like, holy shit.
How old are you when this is happening?
This was 1983, I'm going to say. So I was 25, 24. Okay. And he picks the phone up right away. "John, my boy, how are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm good, Mr. Trump." "Oh, don't call me Mr. Trump. Call me Fred." I said, "Okay, call me Mr. Mulrooney." So we had a couple of jokes, a couple of laughs with each other. And he goes, "John, my boy, do you know what you are?" And I'm thinking, oh boy, here it comes. He goes, "You are a natural born salesman. Have you ever thought of selling real estate?" And I just went, oh no, and I'll never forget looking at the phone going, I'm a comic. And he kept on pushing it. He goes, "Now I could start you in a junior company. I could show you the ropes." I said, "I'm a comic. I wish you would really listen to me for a second. Don't say no just yet." I said, "I'm a comic." I said it 3 times. And he finally said, "Well, hold on to my card. Don't throw it out if you change your mind." Maybe I should have changed my mind.
Do you still have the card?
No, but the interesting PS to the story is I told this exact story to my family the very next Sunday dinner that we all had together, and everybody was at the table. There was like 20 of us, and the whole family went, "Oh," with the exception of my old man, who went, wait a minute. Fred Trump offered you a job and you turned him down? Give me that goddamn card." And he actually, because I still had it, he actually took the card, and I don't know what he ever did with it, but within years after that, I was making a pretty good living doing stand-up, so it didn't really matter.
Oh, you did very well, because I remember watching you on television. Now, I don't know if you remember this, Sean, because John and I are a little bit older than you. Joan Rivers used to have a show on Fox. I think there's a show that kind of got her in a little bit of hot water with Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
And when Joan Rivers was replaced, John is the person who took over that show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I took it. It was my show for several months before it cycled into something else. But that was just like everything you can imagine about being in Hollywood, and that whole "A Star Is Born" vibe. Like you fly out, you want to become recognized, you want to become famous, and suddenly you are. It was everything you can imagine and more. I mean, it was. I'll give you, for instance, and I see why people get so suckered in and sucked into the whole Hollywood machine. Because when I went out there and I first got the show. Oh, this is an interesting PS. The night I auditioned for the show and I got it, my opening act was Ellen DeGeneres.
Oh shit!
Wow.
Were you working on the Joan Rivers show as maybe as a warm-up comic?
No, what happened was I was living in Hollywood, and I heard they were looking for a host.
Why did you go to Hollywood? Why did you go from Brooklyn to Hollywood?
I went out. I went out to do Star Search, and I lost the first episode to a female comic by the name of Sue Kalinsky. But they saw me doing warm up while I was out there, so they hired me as a warm up guy, and I actually became a writer on the show. And I got a
or on Star Search?
No, on Star Search. On a couple other things out there, but I did warm ups on Star Search, and I got a talent development deal with ABC, which paid me a modest stipend and covered my expenses to move out there. So it was like a no-brainer to go. And Richard Jenny wanted to move out at the same time. And we found an apartment and lived together for the first couple of years that we were out there. So I went out to do Star Search, and I was making the rounds in the clubs, doing my thing. And I heard they were looking for a host. Everybody knew it. And I couldn't get arrested by these guys. They wouldn't return any calls or anything. And
did you have an agent at the time?
What's that?
Did you have an agent?
I had a manager, but not an agent. So I'm hanging out at the Improv one night, and there's this woman by the name of Karen Fox who worked for Fox in the accounting department. And she said, she saw me, she knew what I could do as a comic. In fact, I just finished doing a set at the Improv. And she said, why aren't you being auditioned for this role, for this host gig? I said, the guy won't return my calls. And she said, I'll tell you what, I work across the hall from him. I'm going to walk your tape in. If you get the gig, you got to promise me a spot on the show. I said, sure. So she did. And the guy didn't want to give me the spot. You know why? Because he saw an audition tape of mine and I was wearing short sleeves shirt. And that was his reason for not wanting to even give me a look. But she convinced, yes, I know, dude, this is welcome to the business. She convinced him to change his mind. She said, I don't know what it was about the short sleeve shirt, but you got to watch this guy work. And I put on a suit and a tie. And when I put on the suit and a tie, and he put me on reluctantly, he put me on 13th of 12 other people auditioning. He put me on last as like a courtesy. And I destroyed the place. And he said, wow, he goes, I need for you to audition for, and it was the guys who ran Fox. It was Barry Diller, Rupert Murdoch. The very next day I was appearing, I was doing a showcase in front of them. And it's a long story, but Ellen DeGeneres was the opening act. I got a standing ovation at this show with all the industry insiders. And when I was about to turn and get off the stage, you remember Harvey Korman from the Carol Burnett Show?
Of course, I loved Harvey Korman. Yeah,
Harvey Korman jumps up on the stage and he grabs me by the arm and he pulled me back to the microphone. And he goes, how about a hand for this kid? I think we just saw the next Robin Williams. And the next day I had the job. I had the gig.
Now, the funny thing is, I was able to see that tape, and I know what was wrong with the shirt. You were wearing a Harris Waltz shirt at the time.
Yeah. So, I was very prescient even back in the day.
Well, you saw things coming. So that's kind of amazing, man. So you wanted to. Who did you interview on the show? Anyone's kind of stand out? Was it a good show?
There was a lot of people that stood out. Jesse the Body Ventura. Chris Lemmon, do you remember Chris Lemmon, who was Jack Lemmon's son?
Yeah.
Do you remember the big thing was the Aramis Man back then? Anybody who became the Aramis Man suddenly became a huge star. The one before Chris Lemmon was Tom Selleck. So Tom Selleck was the Aramis Man. And next thing you know, he's got a writer, Magnum PI, and all these big movies. So everybody who had been picked I think Harrison Ford was an Aramis Man. So he was on the block to be the next big star. And I remember sitting there talking with him about the different colognes that our fathers wore. And I said, in my house, the only thing that was ever in the medicine cabinet was Old Spice and High Karate. Do you remember High Karate?
Yes.
Yeah. The worst smelling swill ever. And he goes, yeah, my old man used to wear that shit too. And I was like, and we're joking back and forth. And in the middle, I'm going, his old man's Jack Lemmon. It was like, oh my God. Like, am I actually sitting here talking dads to Jack Lemmon's kid? It was surreal. Yeah, it was bizarre.
But I think it sounds like your New York experience kind of like, again, I keep using the expression toughened you up, but most people or some people would be overwhelmed, starstruck, not be able to be comfortable and be themselves when you're put in the chair and the camera's on you and the show relies on you and you're interviewing all these famous people. And here you are, I don't even know if you were 30 years old at the time.
No, I wasn't.
And you're handling it.
But all of those things did happen. I was intimidated. I was starstruck, all of the above. But
never came across. You always seem very natural to me. You always remind me of Jim Carrey.
Well, thank you. It was a good 10 years of being on stage in front of very demanding New York audiences that allowed me to, to hold my position, hold the line without folding. It was all of that training, and it paid off. So I fooled you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching you on TV. I remember thinking you were really funny. You were on some other stuff too, right? Didn't you? Did you Star Search?
I did a show,
Solid Gold. Like there were a whole bunch of these '80s shows that just kind of like blend together.
Yeah, there was a bunch of them. There was obviously Evening at the Improv, Comedy on the Road. Yeah. Comedy All Stars. There was always comedy something or other. Comedy at Caroline's was another one I did a couple of. Comedy Tonight, which we did back in, God, it was the first syndicated show we ever did, 83, 84, out of the then Metro Media Studios, which became Fox. And dude, I caught the wave right at the perfect time. I feel bad for anyone who came after that, because it really was a golden era of stand-up. It was magnificent.
I remember you were big, man. Sean, did you ever go back and watch any of those? It was like these young comedian specials, and you would have like Kinnison on it, and Bob Nelson.
Yes, I grew up watching those things.
Right, and that's what made you want to be a stand-up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always used to say that whenever I would buy a record, like, whatever kind of music it was, I would always buy a stand-up set too. I had tons of Red Fox and Howie Mandel and Dice and Lenny Bruce. I had tons and tons and tons of tapes. So I always had it ingrained in me. But those shows growing up in the 80s for me were fucking phenomenal. Even like the MTV one, the half-hour comedy hour was a big one for me.
But the thing is, John was a big part of it.
I know. I remember. I mean, he mentioned, being roommate to Richard Jeni. He was one of my favorite comics growing up. Absolutely. Yeah. He was just
had that great Jaws bit.
Yeah, I remember Jenny was a prolific writer. I would awaken sometimes in the middle of the night. We were on opposite ends of the schedule. We were comics, so we were real night guys. But I like to get up early and get out, go to the gym and do my thing. Richie loved to stay up until dawn, smoking cigarettes, working on bits. And I remember so many nights I woke up in the middle of the night and I swore he had people in the apartment. And it was just him working on his stuff. And he would take a bit and just pound it for hours over and over again, take a tiny little seed of a thought. And within, 5-6 months, he had 3-4 minutes of some really golden, magnificently written piece. And I really admired that, because I just, not that I could have wrote like that if I had the discipline, but I was more, my focus was more extemporaneous. If it wasn't in the moment, I didn't want it. I could pull material from memory and do it, but it had to work. It had to blend within the moment of being on stage. And I got labeled as somebody that worked the crowd, which is not completely untrue, but it was only to set up what the bits I had ready for them, in addition to stuff that was truly extemporaneous. And the combination of those two, that's where I did my writing. I didn't do it at home like Richie did. I did mine on stage, because there was so much stage time to be had by everyone. I was on somewhere every night of the week for at least an hour at a time. It was great.
There's a lot of
cool when I was growing up, and I could look back on this now, being a comic for so long too, not knowing anything about comedy as a kid, but knowing the differences in the style of comedians. So when I brought up Richard Jeni, like, I knew as a kid how that was funny, but how it was smart on top of it. And I knew the differences between, like, I'm saying name Carrot Top. I knew the differences between prop comics and how they were funny in a different way. And then, more of your slapstick or like, even vulgar guys like Dice. And now, being a comic now, I realize it's so hard to be a great fucking writer. It's really hard to be everybody could tell jokes and stuff, but when I see guys like Richard, it just makes me think of some of the, the guys that are out now who I think he would be on their level. If that makes sense.
Great writers and great comics are an anomaly. You're usually one or the other.
Yeah.
But to have to have both, to be a great comic and a great writer is pretty rare, but it's out there. I mean, Seinfeld, I think, is a great writer, but for Seinfeld, he doesn't write for other comics. He writes great for him. And we were hanging out at the Improv one night, and there was a standing offer from Rodney that if you could tell him you could write a joke for his act, he would pay you $50. And this guy that good friend of mine we used to go to other clubs, said Lenny, comes up to me and he goes, man, he goes, I just made $50. I said, doing what? He goes, I sold Rodney a joke. I said, what's the joke? And he tells me the joke, and I cracked up. I said, you wrote that? He goes, no, it's his. I said, what do you mean? He goes, it's from his first album. I went up and just said it in front of him to make him laugh. And he said, hey, that's funny. Can I buy it? I said, sure. He sold him his own joke.
John, what did you find like the biggest difference between being a New York comic and an LA comic?
The New York comics for sure could handle anything. You know, the LA guys, I think the LA vibe was a precursor to the whole woke nonsense. You know, I remember them being dismissive and condescending to crowds. You couldn't do that in New York. You would get your ass kicked. I mean, literally, you would get torched on stage. And I remember seeing them work in different venues and talking down to the crowds and dismissing them and lecturing them for not laughing at their brilliant material. I mean, they were not as sturdy, let's say, as not even the New York guys, the Boston guys. The Boston guys were they would stand in front of anything. Boston comics said that was a very, very great. That was a really tough circuit to be involved with. Those Nick DiPaolo, Lenny Clark, all of those guys were they were aces, and you never messed with them. You would never want to mess with those guys because
those are the guys that came out of that Chinese restaurant.
Yeah. Oh my! I forget the name of it. Everybody played it. I played it once too. Only once. I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, Kevin Meaney, Stephen Wright. Stephen Wright, not as much, but yeah, guys like DiPaolo and Lenny Clark. Oh,
Sweeney.
Sweeney. Oh,
Sweeney did it.
Steve Sweeney. You never want to mess with Sweeney. Yeah.
Well, what was the other guy? The big Boston comic, Dennis. What's his name?
Oh yeah, Dennis Leary.
Dennis Leary.
Leary. Yeah, all those guys. Yep. Yeah, right. They didn't play.
And then comedy started. I guess like would you say early 2000s? Does it kind of like start to slow down a little bit?
Even earlier than that. I mean, I would say 95-ish, 95, 97. And by 2000, it really was. I mean, you really had to dig in and find. There was still a couple of old holdouts, but all the great clubs were gone. Rascals was gone. The East Side Comedy Club was gone. Governors has managed to stay in the game after all these years, but and the Brokerage, but all of those great clubs from out here on the East Side, on the East Coast, gone. Yeah, Pips gone. Pips was never a great. Pips was one of those clubs like you didn't go there to make money. You went there to get good. That was the thing with Pips. You know, it was such an icon. It was such a amazing place to be in. It was a real anomaly. That it was the island of misfit toys.
And then you hop on a plane and did you tour to Israel?
Yeah, I went all through Israel. I went through through the Middle East. How'd
you make that turn?
Dude, I got a call one day out of the blue from Avi Lieberman, and he said, we're doing this benefit for it was called Crossroads. It was an outreach program to, believe it or not, heroin addicts in Israel. It was being funded by Jerry Seinfeld. And they were keeping it real quiet because they didn't want the world to know what a problem heroin is. Like, apparently they have all of these villages that were abandoned during multiple skirmishes, and it was just agreed upon in a peace settlement. All right, this is going to be like a no man's land. and all these junkies moved into it, and they were living in these abandoned apartment buildings, getting high and doing things that, heroin addicts do. And they were this program called Crossroads was an outreach program. And it was me, the first time I went, it was me, Avi, Mark Schiff, and there was another, it was a local Jewish comic. I can't remember. I was the only Goyim on the bill. And the fact that I was there and I wasn't Jewish, oh my God, they just loved me for it. Because they were like, oh, you don't have to be here while you're here. And I was like, well, it's good money. So I guess I am one of you.
Did you grow kind of like a little bit of an attachment to Israel?
Not to Israel. I'll tell you what I really grew an attachment to was the troops in the Middle East. When I went all through, Iraq and places in the Middle East, I'm not even quite sure where we were. They wouldn't tell us some of the times. They would just, we just get up in the morning and they'd say, get on that helicopter, and when we land, you're going to do a show. And so they wouldn't tell us where we were going or where we were when we got there, other than the name of the base. So, and I did that twice. That was, without a doubt, the most amazing experience I ever had in my life as a comic, because you just can't imagine an audience more appreciative of you being there. I mean, I would have done it for free. And I remember at the end of the first tour that I did there, one of these generals came out to shake our hands and wish us well. And I said, hey, listen, I don't have anything that I can't cancel. I would love to stay and keep working for you guys. And he was appreciative, but he said, that's not how the military works. And I said, okay, but I just had to put it out there because it was just such a great experience to be in front of a crowd that would die for you, in an instant. And some of them actually did while we were there.
Well, you still do stuff like that. You're constantly raising funds for military families. You're still doing that type of work.
Yeah, I still do it. But when you're actually in a zone where people are getting killed, like the first night we got there, the first night we landed, we couldn't do a show because they needed the sound system for memorial service. And that's when it hit me like, holy shit. I mean, it just got real, Right. It was pretty wild. And I mean, one night we were doing a show, an afternoon show, and the chow hall had now been called the DFAC, which stands for dining facility. And there was a kid sitting up front, like 22, and he was gripping, white knuckling the barrel of his weapon. And I was joking with him a little bit, and he had that 1,000-yard stare. I was trying to draw him into the show, but he never snapped out of it. And after the show, I said, I went up to the first sergeant and I said, hey, is that kid okay? I mean, he looked like he was, in a fog, and he goes, hey, he just lost a couple of his guys. And I said, holy shit, I'm sorry. I didn't know. And the sergeant said to me, fuck him. He's got to snap out of it. We all lost guys. And that just threw me back, because I realized, oh my God, he's right. Like, this kid doesn't have the luxury to even grieve his friends. He's got to refocus and get his head back in the game. And this first sergeant was actually drilling down on him for that. And I felt really bad about the whole situation, but I thought, no, he's right. He can't be zoning out now. I mean, he's going to lose more guys. It was very intense, dude. It was very intense. But the love that the troops had for us being there to break that up in whatever manner we could was not like anything I'd ever experienced as a human being, much less a comedian.
It puts everything else into perspective, doesn't it?
It really did. Yep. It really did. It truly did.
I mean, even out of comedy, you kind of it's a cliche, but you don't sweat the small things anymore.
Well, try not to.
Yeah. So what are you doing now? Like, at the top of the show, I mentioned that you did something in law enforcement. Are you still doing law enforcement at all?
I am actually. Right at the moment, though. Ironically, I got hurt 3 years ago. We were trying to take in a woman who was having a psychiatric episode, and it turned into a melee. And I went down trying to restrain her. And I had to have surgery on my arm, which led to a second surgery and a replacement, which is now going into a third surgery. I just found out. So I'm still, registered and on the books, but I'm getting unemployment and workers' comp while I'm getting over this fucking injury.
So how do you make the move from being on TV, being out in LA, touring, doing stand-up, and then working in Hudson Valley doing law enforcement?
Dude, I didn't make any of those moves. They just presented themselves and they felt like the right thing to do. I was doing morning radio. This is how this came back. I was doing morning radio.
That's another thing you did I forgot about.
Right. Up in upstate New York. And a big case broke up there. There was a local cop that saw some guy from America's Most Wanted walking on the street. And he said he recognized him and he went to make the arrest. And the two of them went through a plate glass window. The cop had like 110 stitches in his face, and it was national news. So I called the local PD to get the public information officer on the line to for a statement. And I call him up, and he goes, "Hey, Mulrooney, never mind that guy. Bring me on. I'm funny." And and he was funny. And in fact, I had dinner with him last night. And his name was Dave Dean. He was an old school homicide detective, and we became really good friends. In fact, I turned it into a regular segment called Ask Officer Dave. It was like a law enforcement segment on the show. So after about a year of having him on, and he saw how much I love police work, he said to me, I don't know, it was kind of almost casually. He goes, "Hey there, Mulrooney." He goes, "I see you love this cop stuff." He goes, I know a department that's looking for guys." I said, "Looking for guys?" I was 50 at the time. I said, "What are you talking about? I'm 50 years old." He goes, "Yeah, it's not like that up here." He goes, it's a right to work state. It's not like civil service. He says, if you pass the requirements, physical requirements for 50-year-old, they guarantee you a part-time job. You make up your own hours." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I'd never heard that before." He goes, yeah. He goes, full-time department with all part-time guys. And I was like, "What?" And he introduced me to the chief. And a year later, I was driving fast with a gun.
And you learned how to shoot and you qualified and everything?
Oh, yeah. I'm a good shot. I actually, I trained to the point where I could train guys in it now.
Oh, shit, I'm gonna be 50 next year. Maybe I'll move upstate.
Come upstate, dude. We'll put you through. We'll put you through paces. We'll get you in shape.
That's a pass to physical.
I will pass the physical.
Sean, you slipped you slipped in your bathroom, okay, and almost broke your back. You're going to go do law enforcement? Stop.
You want me to show you something, Jeffrey? I'm going to shut Jeffrey up live on this podcast because
we're going to mute him.
He's an asshole. You'll learn this. For the camera to see today, I ran 7 miles. Can everybody see that? Yeah, 7 miles.
Good for you, brother. Whose phone is that?
Calories so far, mine. So I burned 4,000 calories today, Jeff. How is Burger King?
7 miles? What, in 10 days?
7. That's today, Jeff. That's today. 7 miles.
And just remember, no one outruns the radio either, so you don't really have to worry about that.
That's true too.
Before we let you go, and we say this all the time, this is a music show. We have not spoke 1 ounce of music. John, are you a music guy at all?
Dude, I'm old school rhythm and blues. I mean, anything Al Green, Earth, Wind and Fire, Four Tops, Temptations. That's my jam. That's always been my jam. Kool and the Gang.
Yeah, I saw them this summer.
Casey and the Sunshine Band. I mean, that's what I grew up with. The Bee Gees, disco. I love Donna Summer.
Great. You talk about stuff that kind of like that stays with you forever, right? My first job out of college, I worked for CBS Records. Okay, I worked in Black Rock on the 11th floor. That's where everything happened. That was A&R. And wow. I went, and my job was, I was really the go-between between the artists and our accounting department. So if you were recording an album, all right, bills were sent to me. I set up a file number. So those little numbers that you see on the side of an album, I assigned those. And I kept track of how much an artist was spending. And until the company recouped what it put out, an artist wouldn't get signed. One day I come back from lunch and there's a message on my desk. Maurice White called.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, here I am, maybe 22 years old. And the leader of Earth, Wind and Fire calls me up and couldn't have been nicer to me because I can get him paid faster. And it's just like, holy shit. I mean, this was when they had Fantasy. They had September out already. And then it was just like, oh my God, like, and I love that kind of music too.
Best
I'll
music.
never forget that.
That's my jam. That's my jam.
Well, I flew out to Los Angeles to officiate the wedding of my friend who plays bass for Morris Day and the Time. There's my R&B contribution.
You didn't run there?
No.
He's like Forrest Gump. He just kept.
Hey, you know what? I just found out. Did you know that Jim Hanks is Tom Hanks' younger brother, and he looks so much like him that he and sound like him. He actually did the voice for Woody in Toy Story 4, but he did all the running scenes in Forrest Gump. The Jim Hanks.
Oh, really?
That's Jim Hanks running. Yeah, that's Jim Hanks running in the movies.
I don't know who Jim Hanks is.
Jim Hanks is Tom's younger brother. I'll tell you a great quick story. He was a waiter at the Improv, and one night we were sitting there talking, and he was, complaining about, hey, it's so hard to make it in Hollywood. Imagine, what it is being Tom Hanks' younger brother. He goes, everywhere I go, I'm just Tom Hanks' younger brother. So shortly thereafter, we were both on a cattle call somewhere. I remember I was walking in as he was walking out. And I said, hey, what's going on? And blah, blah, blah. And we chatted a little bit, talking about what the audition was about. And I said, you going to be at the club tonight? And he goes, yeah. I said, okay, I got a spot. I'll see you later. So I walk in, and there's this over-the-top gay casting director. What a surprise. And on his desk is a stack of 8x10s. And he picks up the 8x10 on the front, on the very top. And he covers the name, and he goes, who does that look like? Who does that look like? And I said, it looks just like Jim Hanks. And he went, oh, and he put it down. And I went into the Improv, and I saw him that night. I told him that story, and he went, somebody recognized me. Thank you.
John, what do you have going on? How can people follow you?
I'm doing a podcast now called The Great Awakening: Consciousness, Comedy, and Conspiracy. And it's up on YouTube. It's also on my Facebook page. I'm also doing it through StreamYard. And I try to put up one every weekday. Sometimes I'll do one over the weekend, but I try to do up at least one every weekday. And it's about, current events, politics, consciousness. I love doing deep dives into the whole conspiracy thing. I'm fascinated by it, all the QAnon theory and all that other stuff. I think it's amazing. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now, creatively.
You going to watch any of this speech tonight at with the Joint Chiefs?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really curious because the timing of all of these things is so bizarro. He kicks Zelensky out on Friday, and here right before he makes this joint State of the Union address, Zelensky apparently they've penned a deal in theory.
I think he's going to announce it tonight.
Yeah, he's got it, dude. He's the master troller. You want to hear something interesting? You know the YMCA song that he's always doing?
Of course.
Do you know why he does that song?
Well, didn't he have a problem with the Village People? The Village People had a problem with him in the past?
Originally, they asked him not to do the song, but he paid for the royalties. So, no. But the reason he sings the YMCA song is because the only YMCA that was ever in Cuba was, guess where? Gitmo, from 1918 to around 1913, to around 1918. Then it was knocked down in a hurricane. So when he says it's fun to stay at the YMCA, that's why he's singing that song, because the only YMCA that was ever on Cuba was at Gitmo, and that's why they call it the spa. And so he's trolling the people that are going to ultimately be in the spa. And if you notice, that's why Pete Hegseth is heading down there. And they said, oh, we opened it up for 30,000 immigrants. Nah, I don't think so.
See, I know we got Gitmo after the Spanish-American War, right? Okay. We wound up protecting Cuba for about 40 years. And while we give Cuba its independence, we had made sure that we kept a military base. Not so, one, to make sure Cuba didn't do anything stupid and enter, any type of get into any type of agreement with a country that could be a problem. But the thing is, they're only like less than 100 miles away from the coast of Florida.
Yeah, 90 miles from Key West.
That's right. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons why we still maintain a base down in Gitmo. So, I mean, it's so funny how this stuff just doesn't go away. But the thing is how people try to make you forget that any of this ever happened.
Right. There's another one of those bases in Greenland, by the way. Remember all the hoopla over Greenland? There's another one. It's called, I believe it's called Camp America, but it's another Gitmo style detention center. What a great place! You stick that in the middle of the tundra. You don't even have to put a fence around it. Nobody's going anywhere. You know,
John, we could talk politics and everything else longer. The speech is going to come on shortly, so I want to thank you so much for coming on, man. You are a really interesting guy. Good luck with your surgeries you got coming up, and guys, follow his podcast. Hit up John Mulrooney. Very, very funny guy. Thank you so much, man, for your time.
Yeah, we appreciate it. All right,
guys.
Have fun, guys.
We have more stuff coming up, so keep subscribing, keep following us, okay? And big announcements to come in the next couple of weeks. Take care, everybody.
Later.
All right.